We talk a lot about leadership here on A Seat at the Table. However, we don't often discuss how to turn good intentions into an action plan. This is foundational to actually getting things done and making our business more successful, not just this year or this quarter, but for the long term. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome back to A Seat at the Table, where we sit down with industry leaders and innovators to get their insights and advice on how we can make our businesses and our lives more successful. Meet Antonio Garrido, author of My Daily Leadership, a powerful roadmap for leadership, success, and founder and president of My Daily Leadership, a leadership development organization with a mission to inspire 1 million of the world's best leaders to reach their full potential. Antonio has over 25 years in senior leadership positions with world-class organizations. He's an expert in leadership transformation, shaping high-performance leaders out of highly stressed and overworked executives. Antonio blends his own vast commercial experience with proven techniques to embed a unique brand of leadership development. As Antonio points out, success is a habit, not an event. Today, Antonio will be sharing his insights on how to develop leadership insight, which leads to corporate foresight, the critical importance of developing a leader's number one resource, action bias, and how to identify and eliminate your leadership blind spots. Strong leadership is foundational to the success of any organization. However, finding the right people to fill key executive positions is not always easy. In fact, it's become increasingly difficult. That's why leading organizations turn to AsiaNet consultants. AsiaNet has a well-earned reputation for being able to recruit candidates for even some of the toughest search assignments. To find out more about them, check out their website at asianetconsultants.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes for this episode. Meanwhile, let's sit down with Antonio and learn how we can lead our company to greater success. We talk a lot about leadership here on A Seat at the Table. However, we don't often discuss how to turn good intentions into an action plan. So I'm really happy to have you here with us on A Seat at the Table, Antonio, because I think this is an area of leadership that will be very interesting to dive into.
Thank you, Jane. I very much appreciate the invitation. I'm excited to be here. I hope I can help.
I think that people have been given a lot of information, insights, inspiration, and so forth on how to be a better leader. But a lot of that's theory. And it's not that people don't understand the theory, but taking theory and turning it into an action plan, as you know, can be a bridge too far for many people. Based on your experience, how do you develop a leadership strategy that can help companies start to turn this into an action plan?
So, great question. Great question. There is nothing in this world, well, that's probably a slight exaggeration, but I think we all over-reward planning and under-reward doing, right?
Right.
I could ask 100 people and say, hey, how would I do this thing? I mean, it could be something as simple as how would I lose 10 pounds before my brother's wedding in 6 months' time, right? And everybody would have a pretty good idea of how that might be achieved. In other words, putting a plan together. We don't seem to really struggle with plans. We all know, of course, Jane, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So we all start with, hey, this would be great if only I, could do this. But one of the things that we talk about in the book is, well, what is your most valuable resource? And when we talk to a lot of leaders, and I'm talking leaders of small companies, but also very, very large companies with, thousands of employees and billions in revenue. And when we say, what's your most valuable resource? You get a whole range of answers from cash. Some people say people, right? Some people say, time, health. Okay. So we talk about some of this in the book. The most valuable resource is what we call action bias, right? Actually doing something. A lot of people don't turn the plan into action for fear of, maybe making a mistake. And I get it. And, at its heart, that's maybe an ego play. And I get that too. Also, people want the thing to be perfect before that they can start to execute. But, imperfect action course correct along the way, right? Make a plan and then go for it. So in one of the things that we talk about a lot in the book is this principle of action bias, which is, okay, put together a plan. Terrific. How, what's it going to look like before? I used to have a chairman, and he would say to me, "Hey, Antonio," this is when I was the CEO, managing director. It was a top Fortune, very large organization, very complex organization with lots and lots and lots of people, lots of plans always in play, right? And he would say, "Hey, Antonio, remember, it's ready, aim, fire. It's not ready, aim, 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 fire," right? And neither is it ready, fire, aim. But the point about make a plan, make a start, and course correct on the way. I remember when I was learning to fly, my uncle, I was lucky enough to have an uncle who had an aeroplane. So, and we had a holiday home at the time in Mallorca, Balearics, just outside Spain. And we were living in the time in the UK. And he said, "Hey, listen, why don't you just, whenever you want to go, to the house for the weekend, to the villa for the weekend, just take my plane, right? Just learn to fly and take the plane." So I was fortunate enough to be in that position. So I learned how to fly. And what amazed me was the number. I guess it's a bit like driving, but the course corrections that the pilot has to take constantly, right? Because of the weather and traffic and instructions from, the ground and lots of different reasons. You have to constantly course correct. So back to your original question. Some people make a plan and then they don't execute for fear of it not being perfect, or for fear of it not, having some gaps, and they want to close those gaps before they know what to do. They take a pretty Taoist view of the world, which is, if you're not entirely sure what to do, wait, more will be revealed, right? And we don't do that in our business, right? So make a plan, make sure it's a good plan, pressure test it, and then go, because no plan ever survives first contact with the enemy. You're going to have to change the plan anyway. So this principle of action bias, this principle of every plan should have with it a few things. It should have, what are the early milestones for success? What do they look like? So you're kind of in the right direction. It should also have some principle of what to do if we go off course. So the measurement, how we're going to measure it, what the KPIs look like, the frequency of review, and then a principle called management by exception. And so long as things are within a certain bracket in certain areas, then just get on with it. People don't want to be micromanaged. People don't want to be, constantly checked and asked against it. And once you have all of those things in place, you establish what the exception rules are, and then you just get on with it. But here's the last thing to make a note of. A lot of people are really good at starting things and not terribly good at finishing things, right? So it comes back to that thing about the good intentions, right? How many times, Jane, have you been in the gym the beginning of January where people have made all these promises to themselves about, I don't know, losing weight or getting more fit or increased flexibility or whatever it is, and it's packed, right? You have to wait 40 minutes to go on the treadmill on the 1st of January. What does it look like on the 1st of March, right? The gym. Well, typically not nearly so busy, because people kind of give up. So when we talk about in the book, things compound. A plan gets late one day at a time. We know that, but action bias every single day. I imagine, Jane, that you brush your teeth every day. I imagine that you brush your teeth more than once a day, right? Why don't you not brush your teeth for 2 weeks and then just brush them for 3 hours all in one go on a Sunday? Because gums bleeding, your teeth will fall out, right? So by doing something a little bit every single day. And so I have 4 children, and none of them wanted to brush their teeth, nor wash their hands before a meal, nor do their homework, nor tie their shoelaces, nor keep their bedroom tidy. But there are just some things that you have to do every day. And when you're a leader, you have to have a plan. You have a number of plans. You have to work them every single day. Did that answer your question? I'm not entirely sure what it was.
I like
okay.
you're focusing in on the importance of consistency, because I think that's where the train jumps the track in so
Correct.
many areas.
Yeah.
It's the simple things done again and again, but that's the exact things that people don't feel like doing because it's tedious, it's boring, it's not, you don't have the excitement of starting something new. So it's easy to fall off the wagon on that.
Yeah, and you see so many leaders. Remember, all of these things are kind of cultural. They are kind of cascaded from the top. And you see so many leaders who they have a plan, they start the plan, they run the plan, and then the plan gets a bit tricky or difficult or something. And so rather than really dig in and figure it out, they just get diverted by the next shiny squirrel, right? Oh, look, a squirrel. Yeah. And then they run off and do that. If you've ever seen, Jane, 7-year-olds play soccer, where the ball goes over here and then 22 kids all swarm over there, then the ball goes over here, 22 kids swarm over there, and the ball goes over here and 22 kids swarm over there. Well, I've seen leaders try to run businesses that way, and it's not pretty. Right? And in the same time, it's difficult to work for that kind of leader and that kind of culture. So you're right, there's consistency really, 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 really pays. And the businesses that do the best are those that are consistent over time, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that seems too simplistic for people to want to call out. And yet, as you're pointing out, it really is foundational to be able to get any kind of results over an extended period of time, to get the results and maintain them. Now,
yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. How do you develop leadership insight that you refer to, which leads to corporate foresight? I think that's something that it's quite interesting, and few people have tackled that. We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about insight a lot in the book and in our program. There is no shortage, certainly for any of the companies that we've worked with and any of the companies I've run for that matter. Right. There is no shortage of data, right? There's if you want to know some statistics about, just go and knock on the door. Any door that has above it the sign accountant or accountancy department, right? Just go. You'll make their day by asking them, what data do we have about this? What statistics do we have about that, right? There is no shortage of data, but there is a huge shortage of insight. And insight lies somewhere within the data. A subset of data is information, right? So data is very wide. Information is a subset of that data. And how do we figure out which pieces of the information are really, really important to us? And you might want to consider that in terms of the principle of knowledge, right? Which is not all data is important, but when we can start to filter through all of the data to get to the important pieces of the data, we kind of call that knowledge. So we have, information. So we have data, information, then knowledge is a subset of the information. And then a lot of leaders leave it at that. They kind of think, well, I'm very experienced. I've been doing this for 20 years, and these are the kinds of things that we need to be looking at. And they kind of stop at that knowledge. And a lot of companies rely on that corporate knowledge. We've been doing it this way for 20 years, right? But beyond the knowledge piece, we want to get to this principle of insight. Now, data is very common. Information is a little rarer. Knowledge is a little rarer, but insight is actually quite rare. And those leaders that can actually develop insight, and insight is just like a muscle. You can grow it, you can develop it. And I've known some incredibly insightful individuals. Not all of them have been leaders. But to answer your question, where does that come from? How do we develop that? Well, we give lots in the book, we give lots of examples of insight, and some of them are just, you know, when it's a piece of insight, when somebody regales, you know, they tell you about the tale or the decision or the, you know, and that means this, you know, when they kind of like reveal the insight, everybody around the room, they have, like, you can see the light bulbs going off, right? Everybody has these aha moments. And then once you've seen the insight, you can't believe that you hadn't seen it, right? So I'll give you some examples if you want a little bit later on. But to answer your question, how do you develop it? Well, let's come back to this principle of wisdom first. So we have data, information, wisdom. So before we can kind of get to develop insight, we have to develop this wisdom. So where does the wisdom come from? Well, some people think that wisdom is a consequence of time served, right? I've been doing this job for 20 years, therefore I am good at this job, therefore I know this. But you know what? And we interview a lot of leaders for clients of ours. They'll say, find us a leader for this division or find us a leader over here. And when we're interviewing people, we say, well, tell me a little bit about your experience. They say, oh, I've been a leader for like 14 years. When we dig into that, what we actually find out is they became a leader, and for the first 2 years, they learned a lot, and then they just rinse and repeated. Is that a way to describe it? 7 times on the trot, and they kind of haven't learned very much after that. So they learned very hard and fast for 2 years, and then just repeated that for 7 years. So we absolutely we're the antithesis there, where we basically say, look, wisdom doesn't come from time served. Wisdom comes from evaluated experience. So what does that look like? That looks like every day a leader or a bunch of leaders saying to themselves every morning and every evening, well, let's start at the evening. So a leader's been through a very hectic and busy, one imagines, terribly stressful day. Sorry, I'm laughing because it shouldn't be like that, but let's just pretend for a second that it is. So they've been through a busy day. They should then, in the same way that you, Jane, brush your teeth every evening, right? Every evening, not just some of them, right? In the same way that Simone Biles practiced every day, not just the day she felt like it.
Right.
They should ask themselves, almost like, what would my leadership report card look like today? If I could give myself a score for the day, what would it be? So let's just imagine then they have the self-awareness, which is a whole different kettle of fish, because if you have very low self-awareness, then every day you're going to think you're a rock star, right? But assuming that they have even just a smattering of self-awareness, hopefully they'll be able to say, well, I'll probably give myself an A- for today. And if you ever read the book, the autobiography that Bill Clinton wrote, I can't remember what it was called. It was quite a weighty tome. But what he said was, I was the leader of the free world, right? Probably the most important or powerful person on the planet, being asked to make decisions on the most difficult, intractable, you know, like the Palestinians and the Israelis and the West Bank and security and the economy and right. And he said, now how can I possibly make 10 out of 10 decisions perfect? Like, he's not God, and so he can't. So 7 out of 10 was the best that he was ever shooting for, and hoping that 7 out of 10 was the 7 good ones would outweigh the 3 bad ones. Well, what Bill Clinton was talking about there, to some extent, was this principle of self-reflection and self-evaluation. Back to our leader, at the end of the day, they say, you know, it's probably A- today. Well, that then, because assuming that they weren't perfect and godlike in every conceivable facet of the day, assuming that they then said, well, do you know what, A-, well, what could or should I have done to perhaps make that A- an A, or maybe even an A+. Now here we go, where we're starting to develop this principle of evaluated experience, where in that meeting I said this, but maybe it would have been better if I'd have said that or done this or not said this and did this entirely differently, right? So this principle of every single day evaluating your experience and go on and say to yourself, had I done this, things may have gone better. Had I done that, things may have gone better. So we start to develop this. Wisdom comes from evaluated experience. Instead of just rinse and repeat, new day, Groundhog Day. So that's how we start to develop wisdom, such that when our subconscious will start to constantly say, is this the right decision? Could we do this better now, this very second, in the moment? It's a bit like, I don't know what car you drive, Jane, but let's just pretend, for example, it's a BMW, right?
Okay, why not?
Okay. So Jane drives a BMW, and when she went to the dealership, let's say she drives a 5 Series BMW. When you went to the dealership to pick up your 5 Series BMW, on that drive home, that very day, 5 minutes having picked up your car, nearly every single car you see on the road is a BMW 5 Series, where you think to yourself, well, there weren't that many yesterday. Why so many today? It's because your subconscious it now has BMW 5 Series on its radar. And so conscious is constantly looking out into the environment and what you're doing and what's going on in interactions. And once you focus it on something, it gets very good at bringing that to your attention, whether it's a BMW 5 Series or how could I do this better? How could I have done this better? So now we're developing some wisdom by evaluating our performance. Terrific. So when we think about that, another way of describing wisdom by looking backwards, right, or developing wisdom from looking backwards, well, that's hindsight, isn't it? When you kind of like, in hindsight, I should have said this. Hindsight, I should, right? And it's 2020 vision, right? We can always see things much more clearly in the rearview mirror sometimes. Well, hindsight, right, that principle of looking back, because all leaders' goals, doesn't matter what any leader's objectives are, what their goals are, their job is to future-proof themselves, their people, and their business. That's their job, to not only just make sure that the business is succeeding today, but succeeds into the future, right? And the future is difficult to see. So back to your original question. How do we develop hindsight? Well, we've talked about that. You do it every day by evaluating the experience. What that starts to do is you start, because we are geniuses at pattern recognition. All humans are. We wouldn't be here today if you didn't have that stamped on your genes. So you start to then notice patterns that have been around forever, but you didn't notice them because you weren't paying attention to them, because you were just Groundhog Day, Groundhog Day, Groundhog Day. So when we start to look backwards, what lessons did we learn? What lessons should we have learned? How do we do this better going forward? We start to develop this insight muscle. We start to, where it was like, I should have done this. Oh, do you know what I should have done? I should have done that. And those kind of, I remember when this happened, right? Those kind of light bulb moments, they're just like sit-ups, Jane. The more we do them, the more we get of them. What then happens is we start to see the world differently. Can I give you a couple of examples?
Sure.
Okay. We talk in the book about Bata shoes. In the Victorian era, towards the end of the Victorian era, when the UK, when England, the world never set on the empire. And that's the expression was, if you looked at maps of the day, most of them were pink, like certainly 3/4 of the world was pink. And that basically meant was that it was either, British Commonwealth or it was part of the British Empire. So lots of British companies were going out into the world to see if they could develop markets for themselves. Anyway, and a lot of the companies sent their representatives all over the world to see if there's a market for this product, that product, this product, service, and that service. Anyway, most of the shoe manufacturers in the UK were doing that. They were just sending people all the way around the world to see if there's a market. And one of the guys got to Africa and sent a telegraph back and saying, no, there's no market for shoes here in Africa. Nobody even wears shoes. No. But there was a guy from Bata Shoes who got to Africa and sent a telegraph back and said, we need to build a plant here straight away because nobody's even wearing shoes, right? So in other words, the market, in his view, it was like, this is a perfect market for us because nobody's wearing shoes. And everybody else said, no, nobody here wears shoes.
Right.
And that's kind of like that insight. Another great example I like, which is one very close to where I used to live in the UK. There was a guy, Jane, I imagine. Have you ever been to England?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you know those big double-decker buses? So it's like a bus.
Right.
That's right. So in England, we have double-decker buses, right? Anyway, near where I used to live in the UK, there was a very old stone-built Roman bridge. Like it was one of those historical national monuments of historical importance. It was like ancient. It was like thousands of years old, this bridge. And it was a really kind of really important landmark. Anyway, this bus driver had just passed his test, and somebody said to him, "Hey, you're on Route 46 today, Frank, right?" So he says, "Okay, terrific." And he looked at the map and he knew where his route was. Okay. So he came to a roundabout, and unfortunately, he went left when he really should have continued. And what he did was he went left, and let's say the bus was 16 feet high. Well, this particular Roman bridge that we were talking about was only like 15 feet high. So this bus came careening round the corner, and it jammed itself underneath this bridge. Now, fortunately, there was nobody on the top deck at the time, because otherwise they would have been killed, right? And so this bus is stuck under the bridge. Of course, immediately, everybody's mobilized. The police are mobilized, and the bus company and engineers. So how do we cut and people with oxyacetylene torches? How do we cut this bus out from this bridge in a way that damages the bridge the least? And how do we get this metal thing away from this stone thing, right? And sandbags, lots of sandbags. There's always sandbags, isn't there, in an emergency? And engineers, and the place was swarming with people. And there was this young lad on his way home from school, and he saw all of this kerfuffle. And he said to the policeman who was putting up some tape, "What's happened?" And the policeman said, "Oh, it's a really tricky operation. What's happened is this bus has gone into the bridge and and they're trying to figure out how to get the bus out without damaging the bridge." And this young lad said, "Well, why don't you just let the air out of the tires of the bus and reverse it out?" Right? Mm-hmm. And you go, "Yes, okay, good point. Why did nobody think of that?" And that's what they did. Now, you might be thinking, "Yeah, well, hold on, this lad hasn't done all of this evaluated experience and No, but the point is that we all have insight if we just let ourselves get through the data and try to figure out where the insight lives, because it lives everywhere. And then you look at people who actively, those leaders who spent time trying to look for the insights. Steve Jobs used to do it all the time, very intentionally. Sam Walton of Walmart, when he started Walmart, he said, "What everybody's building in towns. Let's build out of town, between towns, where the land is really cheap, where there's no competition. Let's make it big enough that and interesting enough such that people will drive 17 miles to it." And Walmart, who's actually the biggest retailer in the world, started by this principle of insight. Anyway, so now we have wisdom comes from evaluated experience, which is hindsight. Spend enough time thinking about how could we do this better? How could we do it differently? Start developing insight. And then once you say to everybody, "Hey guys, nobody here," and when I say, "Hey guys," I mean the boardroom. Nobody here will lose their job for coming up with a dumb idea, right? So you've got to allow creativity to happen. If you have a boardroom that's led by fear, that absolutely kills creativity. For fear of doing or saying the wrong thing, people keep their mouths shut, right? So creativity is killed by fear. So you have to allow people to make mistakes, you have to allow the R&D teams to do something crazy, right? You have to allow them to do the bonkers things, and then good things happen. So leaders can either kill insight and creativity, or they can foster it, engineer it, right? In the book, we talk about Hootsuite. Hootsuite have a director. This is the guy's name, and I'm going to have to swear. Is that okay? Hootsuite have a director. The title, I'm pretty sure, you can Google it. It's the director of shit ideas.
Oh.
So it's like what around here is a bad idea that we have to stop. And their job
Right.
is to just around getting creative and like how do we and last point to make, because you probably have another question. For those that are interested in what I'm talking about, if you Google how did they save Lego,
Right.
Heard of Lego, right? It's just the most amazing story of how they used the principle of insight and collaboration to save Lego, which is just gorgeous. Because when you and I were very, very young, Jane, a Lego set was like 13, 14 blocks in 3 different colors. Now, if you're going to buy a Lego set, it costs thousands of dollars, and it's the Taj Mahal, or it's the
Wow.
State Building, or the Millennium Falcon, and that all came by as a consequence of leadership insight. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you break it down like that. And I think that few people have really looked at it from that perspective. Now, tell us a little bit about where we can find your book, Antonio. I think a lot of people would like to read it.
Well, thanks very much. Well, this is my 3rd book. It's called My Daily Leadership. Yeah, My Daily Leadership. I have it here. A powerful roadmap for leadership success. My other first 2 books were narrated by somebody else, and they did a dreadful job of it. So if you want to hear me, I personally narrate. So some people actually like. So it's available in print and electronic and Audible, right? But so just go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any of those places. You'll find the book, My Daily Leadership, by me, Antonio Garrido. If you want to download it, then I actually narrated it too. So if you want to hear me narrate it, well, you probably don't. But if you do, then you can get it in that format too.
Well, it sounds like really an excellent book for anybody who is in a leadership role. And
Yeah.
I think people will probably want to have the audio version and the print version because you get different takeaways when you read something or when you listen to it. So I'm going to make sure that all of the links for that are in the show notes for this episode.
Thank you. Thank you. And if anybody is sufficiently interested in some of the garbled stuff that I've been talking about, and doesn't yet know whether they actually want to, invest the $20 or whatever it is in the book, then they can have a look at our website. There's loads of free material there. There's lots of free stuff that they can get their hands on to see if they kind of like the cut of our jib. And if so, maybe that will inspire them to buy the book. So that is all the W's. My Daily Leadership, all one word, mydailyleadership.com. And there's lots of free stuff on there, including journals to have a look at and so on. And there are business health checks and so on, and we do assessments that they're not free, but you can see exactly what things that we measure for, including this self-awareness that we were talking about earlier.
Well, it sounds really good. And I just want to thank you again, Antonio, for joining us here on A Seat at the Table. It's just been wonderful to have you on the program.
Thank you, Jay. I've really enjoyed it. Maybe invite me back one day and for the next book, perhaps.
Absolutely.